Hi, and welcome to our first live session of our summer school program. This week we're going to learn about how to program in Java. Okay, so what I've got in front of you is this is a Replit. Okay, so if you're not familiar with Replit, you go to repl.it. All right, set yourself up an account, and you can program in lots and lots of different languages in Replit. So I've just created a Java Replit. And when you create a Java Replit, it creates this file called main.java, and we get this text here, which we'll go through in a minute what that means. Okay, let me just talk about our success criteria for today. So the aim of today's lesson is just to introduce you to Java, help you write your first Java program, and hopefully introduce you to variables, and so we can start to understand how we can store data in Java. Okay, so as we've already discussed, this is Replit, and I'm just going to very quickly show you how to write your first program. Okay, so we're going to talk about the different aspects of the program in a minute. I'm just going to spread this out a bit, just because I like to do that. It's just my way. Okay, so we've got this this line at the top here that says class main. We'll talk about that in a minute, and then we've got this bracket here. And then underneath that says public static void main, and it says string args in the brackets, which doesn't seem to make any sense. Okay, then we've got a couple more brackets and then a bracket at the end. Okay, now I'm going to explain to you what these bits in the blue mean later on in the session. But what I do want to just show you now is these brackets. Okay, so you can see that when you highlight or when you click near one, the other one highlights. Okay, so when we use the brackets, if we open one of these funny curly brackets, we always need to close the funny curly bracket. Okay, so one of the things that you will need to learn when you start to begin to develop programs in Java is that if you open a bracket, you've always got to close a bracket. So if you have a problem with your program, one of the reasons for that problem could be that you are missing a bracket. Okay, so I've got an open bracket there, so I've got a closed bracket there, and I've got an open bracket there, so I've got a closed bracket there. Okay, so it's really, really important to remember those open and closed brackets. Okay, all right, so let's get on with writing our first program. So we're going to go inside this inner open and closed bracket. So we're going to start writing in here. This is where we're going to write our program. Okay, now there's a couple of things that are really important to remember about Java. Java is a strong typing language, which means that if you have to write something in capital letters, if you don't write it in capital letters, it won't interpret it correctly. Okay, so it's really, really important that if I write something in capital letters, you also write something in capital letters, otherwise it won't work. Okay, so here is a capital letter, so I'm going to start with a capital S, and I'm going to write the word system. Okay, now you can see here that Replit comes up and helps us here. So system is actually it's a library. Okay, well it's actually it's a folder inside a library. So we've got this Java lang library, which is basically a lot of code that's been created for us. All right, and inside those libraries are lots of functions that have been written for us, because one of the most important things about Java is its reusability. Okay, and we talk a lot about this when we talk about Java programming. Is what is the point of redoing something that someone's already done? Okay, so we don't, what is it we say in English? We say, what's the point of reinventing the wheel? And that's exactly what we mean in Java. There's no point in reinventing the wheel. So if someone has already written a library, then it makes sense for you to use it rather than rewriting it yourself. Unless, of course, there's a reason why you don't want to use the library. Maybe it's not as flexible as you'd like. It doesn't quite do what you want. But there are ways that you can deal with that, and we'll talk about that in a later session about Java. Okay, so I've got this library called system dot, and as you can see, look, it comes up, and I want out. Okay, so I'm going to use out dot. Okay, and again, these are all the methods that I can access. Okay, so these are all the things that I can do when I go to system.out dot, and as you can see, there's a long list of them, and I do recommend that you have an experiment with those, okay, and just have a play around. I'm going to use print ln. Okay, now I'm going to print. One of the first things we should always do as beginner programmers is we should always write the hello world program. So I'm going to print a string. Okay, and again, We're going to talk about what a string is at a later date, but I'm going to print a string. So I'm going to pick this one, all right, and it's put X in there. So in there then, I'm going to write in my string, okay? Now, strings, and again, we're going to talk about what strings are later on in the session, but strings always go in quotes. So I need to put this in quotes. And fortunately, Replit puts the open and close quote in for me, so I remember to do that. I'm just going to write hello world. Okay, now you will notice, and Replit does it for me, and so this will make your life a little bit easier, that there is a semicolon at the end of the line. Okay, so in Java, there should be a semicolon at the end of every line to tell the computer that that's where that line ends. Unless, and again, we'll talk a bit more about this in later sessions, unless it's not the end of the line. So in the case of an if statement or a loop, there will be some times where you don't put semicolons on the end because there is more to come. Okay, so we've got system.out.println hello world. All right, and then what we're going to do is we're going to run it. All right, and then there you go. So it's just going to do some bits and bobs, and there we go. It's printed hello world. Okay, so that is your first program written, and I do recommend that you experiment with that. So you can try hello Mr. Molson. Obviously, you wouldn't try hello Mr. Molson. You can try your own name. Okay, so we can get it to print hello Mr. Molson. I would recommend you try it. What happens if you take out one of the quotes? Okay, so if I take out this quote at the front here, in fact, what happens if I miss all the quotes out? So I take out the quote here, and if I run that, okay, so now I get an error. So here you can see on my screen to the right, all right, that I've got some error messages, okay, and the computer's trying to help me to identify what those error messages are. So if we look at the first one, it's saying there's a missing bracket, okay, so and it's saying it should be in between hello and Mr. All right, so basically, obviously, there's a bracket here. So the computer is confused because it's not expecting a space here. All right, so it's saying, well, I would suggest that you need to put a bracket in there. Okay, obviously, we know that we don't need to put a bracket in there. We need to put quotes in there, but the computer is trying to help us. All right, and trying to support our programming. So if we put the quotes back in, we should find that we get rid of those error messages. Now, don't be scared of the error messages, okay? There's nothing wrong with getting errors. Every programmer has errors. You're always going to get lots and lots of errors. It's just one of those things, okay? But what you don't want to do if you get an error is give up, okay? So if you get an error, just keep playing around with it until you get it right. I mean, what you will find is that although Java tries to highlight where the error is, a computer is a very simple thing. So the likelihood is that the error might be on the line above. It's just the error is only occurring in the line below. So that's important to remember. Okay, so just because it says the error is on line 5 or line 6 or line 10 or whatever, doesn't mean that's where the error is. That's just where the error has occurred. The error actually might be on a line above. Okay, so let's just run that again just to prove that that works. Now we fixed it. There we go. So our quote. So don't forget your open and close quotes. Okay, for strings. Okay, so there is our first program. As I said, you can experiment with that, but system.out.println, and then in the brackets you can write a string that allows you to output data to the screen. Okay, easy, easy peasy. Now let's talk a little bit about Java. Okay, so Java is an object-oriented language. That means that everything we do is made up of objects. Okay, now the idea of object-oriented programming is it's supposed to make programming easier. The idea being that what we're trying to do by creating objects is we're trying to represent real-world entities in our computer program, okay, which is supposed to make life a little bit easier to code. And when we create objects, we can tell those objects how to communicate with other objects and how to interact with other objects, all right, just like in the real world. So as a human, or as a human, you know how to interact with an animal, for example, like a dog, if you have a pet dog. Okay, and so we can recreate those interactions in our Java programs by creating objects. Now, what's important to understand is objects come from classes. Okay, so a class is basically a definition. It's a template for an object. The best way to think about it is like a recipe. Okay, I'm a human. My wife is a human. You're a human if you're watching this, okay? And so we're all humans. We've all been made from the same template, okay? And then you've got dogs, okay? And there's lots of different dogs, and they've all been made from the dog template, okay? But what's important to remember is, although we're all created from the same template, once we've created an instance of a human or an instance of a dog from that template, that dog has its own name, it has its own age, and all the rest of it, and that's the same with humans, okay? So I'm Mr. Molson, I'm an instance of a human, I am one of many humans, but that's been created from the human template, okay? So once you create a human, all of those humans are different. So classes are templates for objects, but you can have as many of those objects, and then they're different in your program, okay? So you can have as many objects of type human or object of type dog in your program. All right, so that's a little bit about object-oriented programming. Now, what's really important to remember when we write in object-oriented programming is we're always creating objects, okay? And we work in what's called classes. So here you can see we've got a class called main. Now, the only reason why this class is called main is because the file is called main, okay? So the file that Replit has created for me is called main.java, so my class has to be called main, okay? And if you try and change this, you'll find you get an error later on, okay? In fact, we can change that now. Let's just see. All right, if you run it, there we go, let's see. Oh, okay, it still works. Oh, I wasn't expecting that. But basically what you should do is the name of your class should be the same as the name of your file, okay? So this is called main.java, and so this is called class main. And later on in, as the summer school progresses, okay, we'll learn how to create different classes and give them different names, okay? Now, this is a very special class because I want to execute code inside this class, okay? So this is basically the code that I want to run, and I want the users to be able to see, which is what I'm doing in the screen on the right, okay? So that's why I've got this very special method. So this is called a method, okay? And this is a very special method that you always need in the class that is going to run, okay? That's going to be kind of outward facing to the client, to the user, okay? So this method is called the main method, and it always has these parameters. So this in the brackets is called parameters, okay? And so this method always has a string array called args as the parameters, all right? So you can copy and paste this. You can just copy this from the video, and you will need this in your Java class if it's a Java class that you want to run and be able to execute, okay? So now what does it mean? So public, that just means that this method is available to be used by classes outside of this class, okay? Which basically means that when the Java virtual machine runs this program, okay, it is able to call this method, and that's the reason why we have to call it, where it has to match this, okay, because if it doesn't match, the virtual machine won't be able to call it, okay? So public just means that it can be called by entities outside of this class, okay? Now, static is interesting, okay? And again, this will make more sense as we progress through the summer school. So basically, static just means that this method can be called without having to create an object of type class, all right? And as we progress into learning, as we progress into learning about object-oriented programming, that'll become more apparent what I mean there, okay? But basically for now, what you need to understand is static is important there, and it just means that we can run this method without having to create an object of type main, which is the class that we've got here, okay? Void, now this is important. Void just means that this method doesn't return anything, okay? And again, in a later session in the summer school, we'll talk about what that means with a bit more clarity. Okay, main is just the name of the method, and as we've already talked about, string, and the fact that this is in square brackets means it's an array, so this is an array of strings, and that the name of that array of strings is just called args. Okay, and again, in a later session we'll talk a little bit about that. But what I want to show you first, and I don't want to talk for much longer, so we've only got about 5-6 minutes left, All right, what I want to talk about is how we can store data in our program. Okay, so everything that we're going to write in our program for now is going to go inside these two brackets. Okay, so it's really, really important that you remember to write everything inside these two brackets. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to write a program that can add together two numbers. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is I need to store those two numbers into the program. I need the computer to remember the two numbers that I want it to add together. Okay, now the way that we get a computer to remember something, I'm sure you already know this, but the way that we get a computer to remember something is we create a variable. A variable is just like a bucket, and it's used to store data. Okay, now I do recommend that you do a search for primitive data types. That's what I've done here. Okay, and if you do a search for primitive data types in Java, all right, you get this long list of the data types that you can use in Java. So basically in Java, again, because it's a strong typing language, slightly different from Python. All right, basically in Java, when you want to create a variable, you have to tell the computer how much space you need to store that variable. Okay, and the way you tell the computer how much space you need to store that variable is by telling it what type of data is it. Okay, and again, you can put some comments in this, and I can make another video on this. But different types of data take up different amounts of space. Okay, so for example, one of the types of data that you can look at here is called an int. All right, and of course that's short for integer, and basically that's a whole number. And if you look on this page, this is the Oracle page, which is well worth looking at. Okay, but it tells you that an integer can be as small as -2 to the power of 31 and can have a maximum value of 2 to the 31. All right, so it's basically telling you how big that number can be and how much space is going to be allocated. All right, so it's important when you're writing programs in Java that you think about the type of data that you want to store, and that's and again, not just the type of data, but so for example, if you want to store really, really big numbers, you may need to consider using something different than from an int. Okay, but for now we're just going to create int. So we're going to go int. So that just tells the computer that I'm creating a variable which is going to be of type integer. Okay, and then I'm going to give it a name. So I'm going to call it x equals, all right, and then I'm going to give it a value. So I'm going to make it 8. Now, as we've already discussed, what do I have to do on the end of the line? I have to put a semicolon. Okay, and I'm going to press enter. All right, and I'm going to do the same underneath. Okay, so I'm going to make another one, which is going to be y equals, let's say, 16. Okay, and I'm going to put a semicolon there. All right, and so I've just created two variables now. I've told the computer that those variables are of type integer by including the keyword int at the front there. All right, and then I've got the name of the variable, so this is how I'm going to refer to it. So I've got one variable that I'm going to refer to as x, and I've got one variable that I'm going to refer to as y, and then I've got the contents of those variables. So at the moment, the contents of x is 8, and the contents of y is 16. Okay, now all I'm going to do then is I'm going to get the computer to add those two together for me. So inside the brackets here, I'm just going to print x plus y. Okay, and if I run my program, let's see what happens. Okay, there you go. All right, and it gives me the output 24. Okay, so I can have a mess around with that, and let's see. Let's just change that to 16, 26, let's say, and leave that one at 16. I can run. There you go. Now, what I do want you to do in your own time is I want you to have a mess around with this. So what I want you to experiment with is what happens if I put 7.5 in there. Okay, so obviously 7.5 is not an integer, so what would you expect to happen? Okay, so let's see if what you expect to happen actually happens when we run. All right, and of course now we get an error message because 7.5 is no longer an integer. Okay, now, and this is important, this is worth reading the error message. So it says that possible lossy conversion. So this is important because basically what it's saying to you is, I can't do that. I'm worried about doing that conversion for you because you may lose some of your data. So you may want to consider whether this is the correct data type to use, which is basically what it's telling you to do. So if we go back to our primitive data types, we could have a go. Let's have we'll use a double, I think. Okay, so we'll put double in front of here. There we go. All right, so now that line should work. So if we have a look, All right, so there we go. If we have a look, there we go, and that works. Okay, so we've got the double and we've got an int. Now look, what's important here, and again I want you to experiment with this because it is important and it's worth it having a play around with, okay, is we've got a double, we've got an int, and then the result is of type double. So Java has done the addition for us, and it's taken one of the data types of that and gone, okay, well I'm going to use this data type for the answer, okay, which is worth a play around. All right, so what I wanted to do, I'm going to write some exercises for you to do that I'm going to put on Replit, and I'll put the link in the comments for this video. Okay, so have a play around with those, but what I do want you to do is just experiment with those different data types, try and create some errors, and try and see if you can solve the errors, but just have a little bit of fun playing around with data types and variables for today's session. Okay, thanks very much for watching. I'll see you again soon, and enjoy the rest of your day.